Good afternoon and welcome to everyone who's joining this webinar. Thank you for giving up your time to listen in. You're going to hear this evening from a number of members of Chambers who are going to be able to give you an overview of the pupillage process and also life as a pupil in Chambers and what you can expect. So I'm going to hand over to our first speaker this evening, who is John Oliver. John, over to you.
Thanks, Louisa. I'm John Oliver. I'm one of the barristers in Chambers. Clearly, I specialise in crime. I historically used to do extradition, but less these days. I'm also a member of the Pupillage Committee, and I'm on the interview panels at first and second round. So what I wanted to talk about really is the process in a nutshell. There's quite a lot of information that you'll find on our webpage. If you go to 5sah.co.uk, and click on the Join Us link and then Pupillage, there's quite a lot of information on there about the timetable, the detail of it. So what I propose to do is summarise it, and if anyone has any questions at the end, then you're more than welcome to ask them. If you've got any questions that we're going along, by the way, stick them in the question and answer tab. So the applications are for October 2024. And the way we do it is through the Pupillage Gateway. As some of you will already be aware, there's a series of questions that are standard to the Pupillage Gateway that are fixed by the Gateway themselves. And then there'll be three individual questions that are set by Chambers. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but you really need to tailor your application to Chambers. And just a few tips on really how to impress us in your application form. Please bear in mind that we get a large number of applications and there's a limited number of people in Chambers considering the applications. What we do is a first sift of anonymised application forms. And when I say anonymised, that's removing name, gender, date of birth, and institution of education. And we do the first sift, trawling through each and every application that were assigned. Bear that in mind. Try to be as succinct as you can be. And please remember also that you're applying for a position as a barrister when being as brief and concise as you possibly can be is always going to impress. And it certainly will ours. What you want to do is make it clear and punchy. Try and set out your best points in a way that makes us want to ask you more questions and invite you in for an interview. If you are selected for first round interview, you can expect a non-legal advocacy exercise. And what I mean by that is it's effectively a presentation based on something that's not legal. So it's not a bail application, it's not a plea mitigation at that stage. We generally find a topic of current awareness, things that are going on in the news, and set you a task to argue for or against a proposition connected to that topic. So we're calling it non-legal advocacy. You'll be given a time limit during which to prepare that, and then a time limit during which to present it in the interview itself. Generally then followed by a discussion about the decisions you made, about what topics or what points you wanted to make and why you made those decisions. Followed then by a general discussion about your application. If you get through to second round, the advocacy exercise then falls into a legal context. We normally do plea mitigation or a bail application or something similar. What we don't expect, bearing in mind that people applying are applying from different stages, possibly pre-law, finishing their law degree, or pre-conversion course, possibly even pre-PTC. So we do bear that in mind. So we're not expecting you to have any particular legal knowledge or to be able to address us on the law. What we're interested in is the content of your presentation. So you'll be told, for example, plea mitigation, given a scenario and a set of instructions, and it will be for you to pick out the bits that you think should be used during that, during your submissions in the advocacy exercise. Again, that's followed by a discussion again about the decisions that you made and why you made them. See whether you fell into any pitfalls. If you did, you don't need to worry about it. we generally are interested in your thought process rather more than whether or not you fell into a pit in the submissions. And then we follow that up by further questions about your application form and your motivations to join Chambers and indeed the profession. You'll be aware, lastly, just as far as the pupillage itself is concerned, you'll be aware that the award for pupillage has been increased this year from 35,000 to 40,000, made up of a grant of 20,000 in the first 6 months and a guaranteed income of 20,000 in the second 6. You'll be hearing from other people about pupillage and the early years of practice, but I can say with confidence that that guaranteed income of 20,000 is generally the absolute minimum that you'll earn, and the vast majority of pupils earn far in excess of that. So that's a whistle-stop tour. If you have any questions about the application process itself, pop them in the Q&A and I'll try to answer them, or someone else will. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think we're over to hear from either Dan or Amy next, in fact. So I will hand over to you. And just to follow up, if there are any questions, you should see the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that, then you can enter your question. And as John has said, we'll address those probably at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Amy, if we go to you first, because you're dealing with making a non-standard application and how to sell yourself and make your application stand out.
Yes, of course. Hi, my name's Amy Woolfson. I was called in 2017. I did a criminal pupillage at a different chambers and then came to 5 St Andrews Hill as a third 6 in 2020. I practice some crime, but I also do extradition, family, professional discipline. I was called to the bar at the very ripe age of 31. So I'm going to just share some thoughts about perhaps coming to apply to Chambers when you haven't just come straight out of university for whatever reason. My experience is that Chambers actively welcomes and celebrates talent in lots of different diversity. And I've certainly never felt that it was any kind of a drawback. I would encourage you to think about the skills that a barrister needs and then draw upon your experiences from whatever you've been doing. So being organised, communication skills, working with people to set their expectations. And I've also written down knowing how to deal with disappointment. I find that the more life experience you've got, the more used to dealing with disappointment you probably are. So, you know, barristers don't win all the time, and being able to deal with that and being able to, as I say, set expectations with clients and also empathise with them can be really helpful. I would say don't be apologetic about whatever it is that you've done. You might not have the sort of classic extracurricular activities that people like to rely on in a bar application. But if you've done volunteering or you're interested in something, or you've even just helped a family or a friend, those are all things that you can use to draw upon to explain why you would be a good barrister, frankly, a very good barrister. My final tip, I'm quite often asked to look at people's applications, not to Chambers, but for other things. And I think it's really helpful getting a barrister to look over your application for pupillage, but particularly if you have a slightly non-standard background, I would invite you to get someone you know really well that might not be a lawyer, and someone that knows you really well, because there might be skills that you've got, or maybe you speak another language and you speak it at home, and maybe to you that's not a big deal, but in practice that's really useful and a great skill to have. So just get somebody who knows you very well to look over your application and say, well, there's this great thing about you, why are you not telling anybody about it? Make sure that you're really singing about all of your strengths. I've also been asked to say a few words about advocacy training in Chambers. We've got a really good advocacy training programme in Chambers. It's not just for the pupils, it's also for junior members. If you're a pupil, it's compulsory, and it's not compulsory if you're a tenant, but it covers training on standard applications that you might have to make in crime, also other areas. They use the Hampel method. It's similar to the training that you do at the inns, and it's really good way to develop your practice in a kind of safe and encouraging environment, and also to learn from other people. I think that's a real selling point, both in terms of when you're a pupil. Obviously, people are looking to see how you're doing, but it's also about having that opportunity to develop and learn from experienced practitioners, but also in your early years of practice that you can still continue to learn, because we all need to. The other thing I wanted to just finally mention was mentorship and support in Chambers. Everybody has the opportunity to have at least one mentor. We also have what are called mentoring circles, so where you are joined up with a group of members of Chambers from different levels of seniority and practice area, and people can just use those to make connections with each other and share experiences. And all of that is just as open to pupils as it is to members, and it's really a welcome space to share thoughts and bounce ideas off people. I think, again, that's a real selling point for Chambers. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. That's been really helpful. I'm going to hand over to Georgia now, who's going to give us an overview of life as a pupil in Chambers. Over to you, Georgia.
Yep. Hello, my name is Georgia. I am a barrister at 5 St Andrews Hill, and I completed my pupillage in 2018 and received tenancy in 2019. So still relatively recently that I was a pupil. And as with all sets, the structure of pupillage, it falls into the first 6 months and the second 6 months. And when you begin your first 6 months of pupillage, you will be allocated a pupil supervisor, and you'll have 3 different pupil supervisors over the course of the 12 months for 4 months each. And that will allow you to experience a range of different work and see a variety of different practice areas, so that you have as much experience in different fields as possible. Now, the first 6 months is essentially your opportunity to watch and learn and absorb everything like a sponge, just take it all in and see as much as you can. In my first 4 months with my first supervisor, I saw work ranging from proceeds of crime work to criminal work, some immigration as well. So really a wide variety, and obviously to a level that is far beyond what you'll be doing when you're on your feet. So it's a great opportunity to see what you might be doing in 10, 15 years time, let alone what you might be doing in the next 6 months. So you'll attend court with your supervisor, you'll watch them in hearings, and you will also be asked to contribute or provide drafts of written work for your supervisor, or perhaps prepare hearings in conjunction with them, so that you get an opportunity to do the kind of work that you might be doing once you properly commence your practice as a barrister. Within this time as well, you will receive training, as Amy mentioned. The training programme is compulsory when you are a pupil, and it will set you up very well in terms of the hearings that you're likely to be conducting when you are on your feet in your second 6 months, and various different types of advocacy that you might encounter. So in addition to your training that you will receive from your supervisors, you will also have training from other members of Chambers, specific advocacy training from other members of Chambers as well. So moving then to the second 6 months, of course, this is the time period when you are on your feet conducting your own work. And it is quite a change, quite a dramatic change from the first 6 months, where you are largely watching other people do things, and suddenly you've got to be doing it all yourself. But you're certainly not on your own. Of course, you will have your pupil supervisor if you have any questions at all arising out of what you're doing, and the juniors in Chambers are really helpful as well. particularly those who might have been in your position fairly recently, remember what it's like. Everyone is very willing to help out with any questions you might have or any emergencies that you might find yourself facing when you're on your feet. So you'll be starting off, you'll be thrown right into the deep end, to be blunt about it. You'll be picking up hearings in the magistrate's court right away, and that's a really good way to learn advocacy skills and develop a practice in criminal law, but also in other areas of law as well. And I'll come to that. So the kinds of hearings that I was doing in my first 6 months started off as first appearances in the magistrate's court, things like case management hearings, bail applications, etc., and then slowly building up to full trials in the magistrate's court. And towards the end of my 6 months, again, some Crown Court work as well, things like committals for sentence, appeals against conviction and sentence from the magistrate's court, things like that. So a really wide range, and you will quite often have to travel to various different courts as well, in London and beyond. That is a feature of the job, most certainly. In addition to crime, which certainly was the focus of my pupillage, and I believe will be the focus of the pupillage cycle that we're currently recruiting for, there are many opportunities, and indeed you're encouraged to try other different areas of law as well. So for me, I gained exposure to extradition work, which now forms quite a significant part of my practice. There's definitely opportunities for you to take on that kind of work if you wanted to in your second six as well. So again, case management hearings and interim hearings through to final hearings at Westminster Magistrates Court. Additionally, I did quite a lot of family work as well. So applications for non-molestation orders, child arrangements orders, various different family law applications. And there is a very strong family team within Chambers. So you're very much encouraged to get involved in all areas of law that Chambers practices in. And yes, I think that's pretty much a summary of the 6 months. So I'll hand back to Louisa.
Thank you. That's a really great summary. That gives us a good idea of what you experienced and what can be expected. I'm going to briefly speak to you next, and it follows on from what Georgia Beatty's just been telling you about the exposure that she had in her pupillage. I'm Louisa Collins. I head up the extradition team in Chambers, and we've got a strong team that deals with a lot of extradition work at Westminster Magistrates Court and the High Court predominantly. That work can complement criminal work quite nicely, and so a lot of pupils tend to cover a lot of the extradition hearings and get exposure to that during their second six. But there's also the opportunity to get exposure to extradition work in the first six, and that's because extradition, as George has indicated, is one of our specialist areas in Chambers. We've also got a proceeds of crime team and an asset forfeiture, and it's likely, therefore, that you would have some exposure to those areas of work within a crime pupillage. That gives you the benefit of having exposure to diverse areas of work within the crime spectrum, and allows you to take on that work and develop those practice areas later on if you choose to do so. I can give you an overview of the sort of work you'd be exposed to with extradition. At the moment, one of the pupils is doing a predominantly extradition-focused pupillage, and so she's been able to come with me to court to view full hearings, high court hearings, appeals, lots of administrative hearings, and gain exposure to the sorts of work that you do in extradition that way. The other benefits is that you also get exposure to doing the sort of written and drafting work that you would be able to do in this area of work as well. Similarly, for proceeds of crime and asset forfeiture, you'll be able to get some exposure so that you can do either legal research or help with drafting in those areas as well. So the benefit of having these strong teams within Chambers is that you've got these areas of law that open up to you and complement a criminal practice well, and you'll see from the profiles of members of chambers that a lot of people do have mixed practices and areas that cover extradition and proceeds of crime, etc., as well as other areas that are listed on the website. So that really is all I needed to talk to you about. There are these other areas in chambers, and you will get those exposures. It's also worth mentioning the family team. George has already made reference to that, and she's obviously had some exposure to that. We are not recruiting for a specific family pupil in the next round, but we're likely to open up for a family pupil in the following round. But nevertheless, there is a strong team within chambers, and it may well be that you can gain some exposure to family work as well, just like George has indicated in her pupillage. So that's really all I was going to address you on. Dan, is it time to hand over to you to address the tenancy process, the decision-making process, and moving from pupil over to a tenant?
Yep, it is. Thanks, Louisa. So my name's Dan Jones. I'm also a tenant in Chambers. I did my pupillage back in the heady days of 2015, and I've been a tenant here in Chambers since 2016. I also sit, like John, on the Pupillage Committee, so I will be reading any applications that you make, and you might also get to see me and John if you get invited to an interview. I've been asked to talk to you about what happens at the end of your pupillage. The first thing to say is we invest an awful lot of time and effort into recruiting our pupils, and so all of our pupillages are offered with a view to you becoming a tenant. Otherwise, what's the point in investing so much time, effort and money into you? Over the past few years, certainly since I was taken on in 2016, all of our second six pupils have been recruited as tenants. So I think I'm right in saying we have a 100% record recruiting our pupils as tenants, certainly over the past few years. As you get towards the end of your pupillage, you will be told more detail about how to apply to become a tenant. But at the moment, the process is this. You supply a CV, a cover letter, 2 examples of your written work, references from solicitors or other people that you've worked for, and you submit that to what's called the Pupillage Selection Board within Chambers. That's a group of barristers within Chambers who determine people's tenancy applications. They will ask for feedback from members of Chambers and the clerks, and they will make a recommendation to Chambers. It's only in very exceptional circumstances that the Pupillage Selection Board's recommendation won't be carried through, and you wouldn't be made a tenant. So that's briefly the process that we follow. In terms of what happens then, it's not the case that you're then just dumped out on your own and left to fend for yourself. The support networks that you have within Chambers, so whether that be the mentoring circles, the advocacy training, the support from the clerks, that all continues. But obviously there's a lot more emphasis on you cultivating your own contacts and growing your own work. What a lot of people find when they become a tenant is that they can start to add a bit more direction to where they want their practice to go. So if they want to be doing more extradition than crime, they can start to lean things in that direction. If they want to be doing no extradition, they can start to move things in that direction. And it's really that once you're a tenant, there's a lot more autonomy given to you about what you want to do with your time and within your practice. But as I said, an important point to emphasize is that moving from pupil to tenant is a big jump, but it's not a jump that you make on your own. The support of Chambers is there for you both during that transition and for as long as you want it beyond. So a short excerpt from me, but I hope that answers a few questions about that process. We'll move into, I think I'm right in saying now, a bit of a question and answer session. So do keep them coming in on the Q&A box. So the first question that we'll deal with is this, and Amy, if it's all right, I'll give this question to you. The question is, I've heard mixed messages on the value of mini pupillages, particularly for those who have already had a first career. what are your thoughts? So Amy, I'll give that to you, given that you came to the bar a little bit later, as you've told us.
I spent a long time working on becoming a barrister, and I'd actually done an embarrassingly large number of middle pupillages by the time I started applying. So I actually started crossing some off the list when I was doing my CV because it just didn't look focused. That said, I think it would be strange for someone to apply for pupillage who hadn't done a mini pupillage anywhere and didn't have an explanation for that. I've had a job, I don't think is an answer to that. Even, you know, I've been a solicitor, or I've, you know, worked as a paralegal or whatever. I think it would be strange if you've not done at least one or maybe a few mini pupillages. Unlike some chambers, we don't require you to do an assessed mini pupillage. And, you know, there is a bit of flexibility about what exactly a mini pupillage is and where it is. It's quite structured. In chambers, you can apply, and there's financial support available as well for doing that. So in summary, I would say, yes, you really ought to be doing some mini pupillages. It would be strange if you'd not thought it necessary to do one, because how are you going to learn about chambers? How are you going to learn about what a barrister does? But at the same time, I wouldn't feel a need to tick off a certain number or to spend an inordinate amount of time doing them, because, you know, people reading your application will appreciate that you've got a working life and you've got other priorities. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And just as adding my voice as somebody who reviews your applications, if you didn't have any mini pupillages, you are unlikely to score very highly, principally because how do you know you want to do the job? If your previous career is also within law, either in this jurisdiction, for example, as a solicitor, or perhaps in another jurisdiction, then that answers that question. But if you're coming to the bar from another career, say in, I don't know, journalism or something like that, how do you know what the job involves and whether or not you want to do it unless you've done a mini pupillage? So I think they're absolutely essential. You don't have to do hundreds of thousands, but certainly a few in the practice area that you want to pursue, I think are essential. So there's a couple of questions about work as a pupil. So to what extent do you determine what you will do in your pupillage, and are you expected to stay in that area? And is there much exposure to professional discipline work for pupils? Georgia, if you don't mind, I'll hand that one over to you. So to what extent do pupils determine what they'll do in their pupillage? And are you expected then to stay within that area? And is there much exposure to professional discipline work?
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of the extent to which a pupil's practice is pupil driven, obviously there is an extent of you need to do the work that you're allocated, particularly in the early stages of being on your feet, when you don't have a pre-existing relationship with solicitors who are going to send you repeat work, because that's something that takes time to build. So certainly in the early stages, you will be given work to do, and that will be the work, that will be what your practice is. But absolutely, you can express a preference to move into a particular area and to try different work. And the clerks are very, very receptive to that. So to give myself as an example, I was always keen to do some extradition work, and I wanted that to be a feature of my practice. While I was a pupil, I spoke to the clerks about doing extradition work, and they were more than happy to try and find some work for me that would be suitable. Of course, sometimes this takes a bit of time, but absolutely those are discussions that you can have. And as Dan explained, once you become a tenant, then that process of deciding what work you want to do and driving your practice in a particular direction, then far more avenues are open to you at that stage. And there's certainly no need for you to feel that you have to pursue a particular practice area purely because you did a lot of it or you did some of it in pupillage. I explained that when I was a pupil, I did some family work. I don't do any family work now. I decided that I wanted my practice to move in a different direction, and that wasn't a problem at all. So yes, there's certainly scope, particularly when you become a tenant, to drive your own practice and to end up in practice areas that that work for you. In terms of professional discipline, it's not something that I ever had much exposure to while I was a pupil, but certainly I know that others in chambers have done quite a considerable amount of professional discipline work. I think we have sent some pupils and junior tenants on secondment to professional discipline firms. So certainly there's scope for that kind of work, should you want to do it.
Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, I think Amy, as the sort of regulatory team member on the panel, if you could just sort of add your knowledge of, is professional discipline work the sort of work that pupils will be exposed to, or is it one of those areas where if there's a practitioner available and they've expressed an interest in it, they might be loaned to that practitioner for a short while?
I don't think we've got anybody who's registered as a pupil supervisor in the professional discipline team. However, there's definitely opportunities to observe work. There's plenty of that sort of work. It's a growing team, and it is work that you can do from your second six onwards. So it's definitely something you can do in chambers. But just sort of echoing what Georgia said, when you're a pupil, you're going to get given all sorts of work, and sometimes you might not instinctively think that it's a certain type of work that you want to do or that you're interested in. And then you find, actually, hang on, I'm quite good at this, or actually, hang on, I thought this sounded really interesting, but it's just not me. And I think that's one of the really great things about chambers, is that there is a real diversity of work, and that if you are interested in having a more kind of varied practice, you can do that as well. So yeah, absolutely, they're criminal pupillages, but there are other opportunities to sort of dabble in other areas and to learn from them too.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think just to amplify that, one of the last points you made, it's important to bear in mind when you apply for pupillage here that we are recruiting criminal pupils. So we want people with a real interest in, aptitude for, and desire to practice in crime. But of course, there is some scope within the pupillage process for you to experience other practice areas. So that's just an important thing to bear in mind. I think we'll just deal with one more question, unless anything else comes in. John Oliver, perhaps I'll direct this one to you. I'm interested in specialising in youth crime. Would that be possible? If you don't mind, John, I'll hand that one over to you. I think you've got a bit of experience in that area.
Yes, I do. Absolutely, it's possible. In fact, during second six and certainly first years of tenancy, because you're already in the magistrates court and you're used to that tribunal, I know the youth court is a separate court, but you'll find that the solicitors instructing you in magistrates court cases will also want to instruct you in youth court cases. There is a process of training to prepare you for that sort of work, and there are various requirements for the Bar Council. You just have to declare that you are doing that sort of work once you're in practice. But yeah, absolutely, it's possible to specialise in it. In fact, I'd encourage a lot of people to do it because it really is a specialism, and I think a lot of people don't recognise that. So absolutely possible.
I think we'll just deal with, typically there's a lot of questions that will just come through in one go. Do pupils equally defend and prosecute? The answer is yes. Chambers has a rich history and tradition of prosecution work. There is a lot of prosecution work available in chambers, and generally speaking, as a pupil, you will be expected to do both. One of the best things you will do as a pupil, although it doesn't feel like it at the time, one of the best things you will do, one of the best experiences you will have, is prosecuting a CPS list in the magistrates court. It's absolute chaos, but it's really good fun, and it's the best learning experience you'll have. We're asked about the in-house advocacy training. What format does it take and how often? That is John, I think if I hand over that to you, if that's all right, because you had quite a hand in designing that program, so you could explain a bit more.
Yep, absolutely. Let me just refresh my memory of the question. In-house advocacy training, what format does it take? So in terms of frequency, it's more or less it's not exactly every 2 or 3 weeks, but it's thereabouts. We've got a program, and we've set the gaps between each of the sessions to make sure that we can get them completed within the year of pupillage. The first part of it, sort of things that you would have probably touched on at bar school, but in a real life situation. It's almost like learning to drive. You learn how to pass a test, and then you learn how to drive. It's a bit like that with the training programs. So the various advocacy exercises, there's some drafting involved. We delve into the magistrates court procedure, particularly when you're coming up to your second six. We do deal with Crown Court procedure of various applications. We touch on extradition as well. And we may be able to tailor individual sessions. If people have a particular interest in adding things like POCA or whatever to pupillage, then it may be that we can tailor exercises within the training program to cater for that. So it's every 2 or 3 weeks, I think it is.
That's great. Thanks, John. As a criminal practitioner, what would you say to those who try to put prospective pupils off the criminal bar? Don't listen to them. The criminal bar is a fantastic job. I quite frankly don't want to do anything else. That's why I'm still here. You will hear a lot of negative headlines about how the money's rubbish, the hours are long. Yeah, the hours are long and it's tough work, but it's very rewarding. You're never going to earn what your friends or colleagues at the commercial bar might earn, but you'll make a good living. So don't worry about that.
Can I add to that?
Of course you can.
I think partly some of the criticism I think comes from people who are exclusively day in, day out crime in the early years of their practice, and it is very difficult for some in some sets of chambers. But I think that's one of the main reasons that it's important for you to consider carefully which chambers you apply to. Are they ones that are just doing run-of-the-mill stuff in the Magistrates Court and Crown Courts, or do they have other practice areas that are that fit well with criminal practice? And it sounds like I'm boasting, but I am. Chambers like ours, where you've got POCA, you've got asset forfeiture, you've got things that are connected to criminal practice like extradition, where you're dealing with people accused or convicted of criminal offences in foreign jurisdictions. So where you've got these crossover principles and where you're taking your skills from general crime into different but related areas is important. And they're the areas of law where you can make more money than you would just doing back-to-back magistrates court trials in your second six. By the way, you could probably expect to do some Crown Court trials in your second six, but it's about tailoring your practice in such a way that means that you can maximize your earnings within the areas that interest you.
Thanks, John. A couple of questions about interviews, a couple of really interesting questions, actually. First of all, will all interviews be face-to-face? The expectation this year is yes. Last year, we did the first round by online and then the second round in person. This year, we're planning to do all of the interviews face-to-face, and we're planning to do them this year in a change from our normal practice to do them on a Saturday. And the reason for that is we found that often the BSB and the Pupillage Gateway timetables are aligned to a poor degree in that they seem to list all of the BSB central exams bang in the middle of pupillage interview season. So we often have candidates who are coming fresh from exams. And so we've taken that on board and we've moved, well, the plan is to move to Saturday interviews. But then there's a really interesting question. How do you recommend preparing for a second round advocacy exercise if the scenario and papers are given on the day of the interview? Well, first of all, giving you the scenario and the papers on the day of the interview with, I think, normally about half an hour to prepare, isn't just us being mean. It's to test the skills that you have to be able to deal with that, not even if, when it arises in pupillage. When the clerks send you an email and say, can you get down to Croydon Mags this afternoon, jump on the train, you need to be there in half an hour and you need to do this sentence. So that's the reason. We're not just being nasty, it's to test your skills. How would you prepare for it? Well, the best thing you can do is get some friends together, ask a tutor, and in effect have a homework club, and practice with each other. Gather up some sample bail applications from your university. Your university is bound to have some. Whether or not you're on the bar course, there will be somebody in your university who will have an idea of a plea of mitigation or a bail application you can make. Get some scenarios together, get some papers together, and practice with friends. And it's a good way of practicing your advocacy. Judge each other, say what you think each other could do better, and practice that way. That's certainly what I did when I was applying for pupillage.
Can I just come in on that?
Of course you can, Amy.
We've not discussed this, but that's almost exactly what I did when I was preparing for pupillage interviews, which was going through the various exercises that they make you do at bar school and turning them into the sort of exercises that you might have to do in a pupillage interview, and just trying them out with friends, practicing them, working out structures. So if you're doing a sentence or a bail application, it's going to have a basic structure, whatever the facts are, and getting yourself familiar with that basic structure. And similarly, on the more sort of, tell us about a time you showed leadership, or, tell us about a time that you had to recover from a setback. They are things you can practice and get good at. And I would encourage you to do that, because certainly in my opinion, I don't sit on the panel for these interviews, but in my opinion, if someone's really well prepared, that doesn't come across as phony, that comes across as them actually caring about it. So I would just say practice as much as you can.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Amy. And actually, that's one of the things we say is that when we ask those sorts of questions, the candidates who haven't thought about them and start to try and wing an answer are often the candidates who don't do particularly well. There's a question about accommodation of interviews around those who study part-time. Yes, I think we're planning on doing 2 Saturdays of first round interviews. So if you can't make one, hopefully you can make the other. And I think that's probably it. Right, we've had a lot of questions that have come in. If we haven't reached them, apologies, but we've tried to pick the ones really that we think would be most beneficial to everyone. So having gone through some Q&A, Louisa, I think I'll hand back to you for a wrap up and a thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for attending. I hope that's been beneficial and useful to you. If you have any other queries or something that pops up in your mind after the event, you can email Tessa Nefranovsky. You will have her email address from the fact of your registration. I believe it came from her email address, so you can pop her an email. And thank you very much for giving up your time. Now we will say goodbye. Bye-bye.